Hi, my name is John Liu, a Flow Ninja and MVP of the Power Platform. And today I have a video on things they don't explain. And this is about troubleshooting a particular dialog, the Power Platform connection dialog, that you see in a few different places. So I want to explain the problem, and I want to explain how do we actually troubleshoot. Okay, so if you're in Flow or in Power Apps, if you head over to the data area under connections, you will see a screen that shows you all your connections. These are all your references to different systems. You see it in Flow, in Power Automate, and you also see in Power Apps. Now, sometimes an old connection becomes disconnected and you get a dialog that asks you to go and sign in. I've kept these two examples because there's actually some issues preventing these two connections from refreshing. And if I quickly show you, if you click through, say, this Forms Pro, it will say we need to sign in with Microsoft. You say OK, and then it looks like it works, but nothing is really happening. If you refresh, you'll see no, it's still no good. Okay. So that's one problem that you can't debug what's going on. You don't know what's going on. Why can't you create this? What is going on? What is wrong? And I want to kind of explain that. I deliberately use the title "Things They Don't Explain." Well, this is technically not something that is an error on the The method to debug this really comes from more of a developer side. If you are more familiar with how does OAuth work and how does the connection works when you connect to an existing system and you're logging in, and then on return, how does that external signing system return code back to us? So in this case, back to the Power Platform. So these are skills not particularly explained well in the Power Platform side, but they are techniques that are part of the OAuth flow, the OAuth authentication flow. So let's perform this again, and this time I'll show you how do you troubleshoot this problem. Okay, so we'll click this, and again you get this dialog that comes up, and it's loading, and you see a few redirects, then it ends up on this URL. Let's just copy that URL. And I will put that into Notepad. Yeah, let's paste that URL. So you see we are talking to an external provider, which is Azure AD. This client ID represents the Power Platform. The the authentication flow is called is the code flow, so the access flow, and then redirect to this URL. The resource we're looking for is formspro.microsoft.com, and then the prompt is the select account. Now, rather than run it in the dialog that was popped up, we can actually paste this URL and paste it to a new screen. And this is where kind of the troubleshooting is. Okay, let's see. If we're logging in, this part goes through Azure AD and logs in successfully. And then we actually end up on this screen. It just kind of, it's part of the redirect screen, which we've returned to. But you can see the dialog is just kind of looping this infinite animation. And if we look closely up in the URL, you will see, hey, there's actually an error. Okay, so let's just copy the whole thing out. So what's happened is, in the whole entire OAuth authentication flow, we send some of our requirements over to Azure AD, who handles the login. It's supposed to process the grant and then give a code back to the Power Platform, which comes back here. Now, something has happened, so there's an error when returning back to the Power Platform, right? And the way that Azure AD tells the source system what's going on is that it sends this error string inside the query string. Okay, unfortunately, on the Power Platform side, this error is not being captured correctly. So that's why we see this dialog just kind of magically close itself. You never see what the error is. See here? So the redirect shows the error, but you don't get a chance to see it. It just disappears. So to really pass this error, we take this string, and you might make a guess what this format is. I'll show you how to read it very quickly. So pop over to Bing, and I use Bing because we need to decode base 64. And Bing has a really nice decoder that's just built in. With other browsers like Google, you may have to find your favorite decoder, which might be this base 64 default decode. A lot of people use that one. But we need to then do a few more little bits. Let's just very quickly look. We need to look for any percentage signs, because they imply to us there's some sort of encoding involved. So just very quickly, percentage 2f is a backslash, forward slash, and then the percentage 3d, that's the equal sign. Okay, so 3d is equal, and the percentage 2f. Now, these are really just part of the URL encoding. So base 64 encoded and then make URL safe. So these are part of the URL encoding. Base 64 need to be padded with equal characters at the end. So that's what that is. And if we copy that, paste it into this decoder and hit decode, you suddenly see, oh, it's got magical text. And if we just copy that out, that's what actually Azure AD is talking to us from the browser. So what it's saying is that a failure has been passed to the redirect URL, which is what we've seen. There's some error, and they return the error to this URL. And the error in this case is actually access denied. The application needs access to a service, Forms Pro, that your organization, this is my organization, has not subscribed to or enabled. So this is actually because when I created the Forms Pro connection, I had used a trial, but that trial has since expired. So I no longer have an active account with you that can use the Forms Pro. So that's the actual specific error in this case. Okay, and you can look at that and go, oh, okay, so that's not refreshing because I don't actually have a Forms Pro active license. So that's what that particular one means. We can see a different one, this one. Wait for the login Microsoft URL, that one. Pop over to a new URL. Sign in. And again, we captured the error, this error. And if we have a look at what this error is, and one padding. So if we check this error in base 64 decode, you'll see this one is actually a SharePoint Online certificate error. So this is more of an internal error. It doesn't explain to us much about what's going on. But for this one, I'll actually just explain. This second connection uses the Office 365 video, which is a preview connector. Office 365 video has actually been deprecated for some time. So it is actually not possible to refresh and get an active token to talk to the Office 365 video. So the authentication step is actually failing internally. And there's really nothing we can do here with this connector. But so that's these two cases. I want to show you one more demo. If we pop over to custom connections. So if you're building custom connections, you have the same problem. And I help a lot of Power Platform makers when they work with custom connections to kind of debug how do you talk to your custom API. And here I have a product called Clarity, and it uses Azure AD. So in the definition file, so generally in the second tab, which is the security, this is where you specify your client ID, client secret, what resource scope you use, or another words for this may be audience. What audience you use, what scope permissions, and what return URL. And what all these accounts to is it helps you when you come to here and do definition. Into test. In your test, when you create a new connection, see this dialog that pop up is the same dialog, right? And in fact, this time, this URL, whatever builds this URL, are the options that we specify in the connection security tab, the second tab. So the options there are combined together to form this URL. And this URL is the beginning of how to get your auth token. So if you are testing custom connection and if your custom connection is, say, secure with Azure AD, you could actually build this URL in the browser first. Just switch out this prompt, switch out the return value, and then see what the error is. If you're able to log in successfully, you'll see the redirect is success, and you get an active code, because with the response we're asking for an access code. So a successful response will look like this. An unsuccessful response, you will get an error in the query string, and that is where you can troubleshoot by decoding that to base 64. Okay, so that is the trick, and it is not well talked about, and I'm not of the opinion that anyone is particularly hiding this trick, but it's really a technique that's more from the authentication side. And if you're a developer, this may help you even building your own applications. How do you troubleshoot that dialog, right? Because the browser redirect to Azure AD and back, that's purely happening through the URL. So all the parameters you pass are passed in the URL to Azure AD, and everything that Azure AD tells you is returned back to the redirect URL using either a code or using an error query string. Okay, so hopefully this is a useful video and teach you some new hacking skills. I think it is very helpful, both as for makers that are creating or fixing your connections, as well as for makers that are creating custom connections and trying to make this dialog work. This is useful for both type of scenarios. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.